It started with a letter. Not a knock at the door, not a friendly heads-up from a neighbor, just a neatly folded piece of paper crammed into my rusting mailbox like it was a coupon for windshield wipers. Notice of easement access for proposed community road extension. I had to read it 3 times before it made any sense. My land. My pasture. They wanted to run a road through it. I'm Sam, 34, ex-carpenter, current grump, full-time stubborn bastard. After the housing market chewed me up and spit me out in 2020, I sold my overpriced condo in the city and bought 10 acres out in ruralish Arkansas, where peace and quiet are still considered a lifestyle, not a luxury. I live in a modest cabin I built myself, with real sweat, splinters, and 2 ruined pairs of jeans to prove it. It's mine. The land is mine. At least, I thought it was. The HOA didn't exist when I bought the property. The new subdivision sprouted up next to my land a couple years ago, with its beige boxes, weedless lawns, and mailbox clusters that look like miniature prisons. I never joined the HOA because I never had to. My land was technically outside their jurisdiction. But, technically, is a word that people like Karen interpret as temporarily. Karen, real name, by the way, was the HOA president of the Whispering Pines development, which would be hilarious if she weren't trying to steamroll my property in the name of community access. I met her exactly once, and it was enough to know her clipboard had more power than her common sense. Back to the letter. It said that the HOA had proposed a community road expansion that would connect their development to the county highway. But to do that, they needed an easement right through the edge of my pasture. Not a huge chunk, but enough to matter. Enough to cut a scar across the land I'd fenced, mowed, planted, and protected for the last 4 years. They didn't ask. They notified. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, HOA office line, of course, and who should pick up but Karen herself, like she'd been sitting there, hand hovering over the phone, waiting for me to object. "Oh, hi, Mr. Chambers," she said, her voice high-pitched and cheery in that way that makes your molars hurt. "We assumed you'd have questions." I kept my voice level. "You're planning to build a road through my property." "Well, we're proposing an easement along the southern edge," she chirped. "It's only about 40 feet wide, and we believe it would significantly improve traffic flow for the entire community." The board voted unanimously. I stared at the wood stove in my cabin, picturing 40 feet of gravel and exhaust fumes cutting through the wildflowers my niece had planted last spring. "Let me be clear," I said. "I do not give you permission to build anything on my land." There was a pause. Then, in a syrupy voice that made me want to bleach my ears, she said, "Well, that's your prerogative for now. But we'll be working closely with the county planning board, and we're optimistic we'll find a path forward." She actually giggled. I hung up before I said something that would end with me on a watch list. The next few weeks were a waiting game. I spent my mornings doing what I always did, tending to the chickens, fixing whatever the latest storm had knocked loose, and enjoying the quiet. But there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. The kind you get when you know someone's planning something behind your back. Then I started noticing things. Surveyor stakes. Thin little sticks poking out of the grass along the southern edge of my pasture. They weren't there one day, and then suddenly, bam, neon pink tape fluttering like victory flags. I pulled every single one of them out, threw them in a pile, and lit them on fire in the fire pit. Figured if they wanted markers, they could use the ashes. 2 days later, they were back. More stakes. More tape. This time, I installed cameras. Nothing fancy, just some motion-activated trail cams I'd used during deer season. One aimed at the fence line, another facing the gravel road leading up from Whispering Pines. I didn't have to wait long. Karen came out at dawn, wearing yoga pants, a sun hat, and dragging some poor surveyor behind her like a disobedient schnauzer. She gestured dramatically at my property while the guy, bless him, looked like he wanted to crawl into the soil and disappear. I reviewed the footage with a cup of coffee and a rising blood pressure. Time to get serious. I called the county office, asked to speak to the planning department. After 15 minutes of hold music and a man named Greg, who sounded allergic to giving straight answers, I finally got the truth. The HOA had applied for an easement through private property. They hadn't been granted one. Yet, there would be a hearing. Public input welcome. That was something. So I showed up at the next HOA meeting, uninvited but definitely not unwelcome. Judging by the double takes and throat clearing when I walked in, boots still muddy, arms crossed. Karen froze mid-sentence. She was standing in front of a PowerPoint slide that said, "Community growth through infrastructure." "Mr. Chambers," she said tightly, "this meeting is for Whispering Pines residents only." I smiled. "I'm here about the land you're trying to take." Figured I should hear the pitch. I sat in the back. Didn't say a word. But I took notes. They thought I was just some stubborn hermit with a beard and a problem with rules. They didn't realize I knew how to fight. Not with fists, but with research, paperwork, and just the right amount of petty. And I had a plan. But first, I had to make them think they were winning. The next couple of weeks were suspiciously quiet, too quiet. No more surveyor stakes, no phone calls, no letters. Just the usual rustle of pine needles in the wind and the occasional distant barking of someone's under-socialized golden doodle. I knew better than to trust the silence. Karen wasn't the retreating type. She was regrouping, probably getting her minions in line and convincing the HOA board that they were on the edge of a historic community upgrade. I imagined them sitting around a folding table with color-coded printouts and lukewarm coffee, plotting out how to slice up my land like a birthday cake no one asked for. So I used the downtime wisely. First, I got a copy of the plat map and pulled the deed for my land again, just to be absolutely, undeniably, legally solid. Then I walked the boundaries, double-checked every marker, and even brought in a buddy of mine, Ben, a licensed surveyor who owed me a favor after I helped him reframe his carport last fall. Ben confirmed what I already knew. My land was clean, fenced within the legal lines, no easements granted, and no gray area to interpret, which meant Karen and her clipboard army were running on assumptions and boldness, not actual rights. Still, assumptions can be dangerous when paired with power. One morning, I found tire tracks leading onto my land, not just close to the edge on it. The fence had been unlatched, left swinging, and muddy tire marks trailed a good 30 feet in. Not deep enough to be construction, but definitely a scouting mission. Someone had trespassed. That was my last straw. I filed a police report. Not that I expected much. Our county sheriff's department has 3 deputies and 1 working printer, but it established a record. I also posted bright orange, private property, and no trespassing signs every 10 feet along the southern edge. You'd have to be blind or actively ignorant to miss them. And knowing Karen, it could be both. The cherry on top? I installed a little solar-powered speaker under the brush near the fence line. It wasn't high-tech, but it played a loud, pre-recorded message when triggered by motion. "Warning, you are trespassing on private property. Law enforcement has been notified." Spooked the hell out of a deer the first night. Worth it. Then came the invitation. A cream-colored envelope taped to my gate like a ransom note. Karen had cordially invited me to a Whispering Pines community development forum. Bold of her to assume I'd show up. Bolder to think she was being subtle. I showed up. It was held at the community center, a shiny beige cube with too much air freshener and folding chairs that probably cost more than my chainsaw. The room was full of concerned residents, half of whom didn't look old enough to own a rake, much less care about infrastructure. Karen stood at the front in a mauve pantsuit, flanked by her loyal board members. They looked like background actors in a courtroom drama, self-important, slightly constipated. "Good evening, neighbors." Karen beamed, oozing performative cheer. "We're here to discuss a critical step toward modernizing our community, an extension road that will improve emergency access, reduce commute times, and raise property values for everyone." There were polite claps, a few bored shrugs. I stood near the back, arms crossed, hat pulled low, watching, waiting. Then came the PowerPoint. Karen clicked through slides with phrases like optimized connectivity, community cohesion, and minimal impact to adjacent landowners. And then, there it was. A satellite image with a bold yellow line running straight across my pasture, labeled, "Proposed Easement Corridor, Pending Approval." I didn't say a word, but I did raise my phone and snap a photo. Karen caught it. Her smile faltered for half a second. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she switched back into hostess mode. "We want to assure everyone," she said, with that artificial calm people use when they're lying through their teeth, "that we're working with all parties to ensure a respectful and mutually beneficial solution." I raised my hand. She looked like she'd swallowed a thumbtack. "Yes, Mr. Chambers? Have any of you actually asked the owner of that land?" I asked. My voice was calm, cold. Karen gave a tight-lipped smile. "We've reached out with formal notifications, yes." Not the same thing as asking. A few people in the room murmured. One guy in the front row, a bearded guy in a camo hat, chuckled. Karen blinked, then straightened. "The board is confident we'll find a legal resolution in due time." I nodded. "Just so everyone here's aware, that land is private. It's not for sale, not for lease, not for anything. And any unauthorized entry will be considered trespassing." Silence. I turned and walked out, letting the door thump shut behind me. I expected them to back off after that. I'd made my line in the sand clear. I had cameras, paperwork, evidence. But see, Karen was the kind of person who believed persistence was a virtue, even when it turned into harassment. The next week, I caught a work crew walking along the edge of my pasture again. Hard hats, measuring wheels. One of them had a clipboard, and I didn't even need to squint to know whose fingerprints were on it. I stepped outside, shotgun slung over my shoulder. Not loaded, just visible. Legal. Intimidating enough. I didn't say a word. They left in under 30 seconds. Karen called me later that afternoon. "I heard there was an incident on your property today," she said, with the fake concern of someone rehearsing for a lawsuit. "No incident," I said. "Just people trespassing, then leaving when reminded whose land they were on." There was a pause. I could hear her blinking through the phone. "Well," she said, "you do understand the benefits this project offers the community, right? I just hate the idea of one person standing in the way of progress." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "I'm the only one with something to lose, and you're all trying to act like it's a favor." Another pause. Then came the threat, sweetened with suburban politeness. "We've spoken to the county," she said carefully. "There are ways to make this happen, even without your cooperation. We're still hoping to resolve this amicably, of course." Click. Amicably, my ass. They thought I was isolated, that I didn't have the time, money, or patience to fight, that I'd fold when the paperwork piled up. What they didn't know? I'd already started digging. The morning after Karen's veiled threat, I woke up with something in my gut. Not dread, momentum. They were coming at me like I was some cranky hermit in a tin roof shack with no clue how the system worked. But what Karen didn't know was that before I picked up a hammer and started building cabins, I spent 5 years working in municipal permitting for a city 10 times bigger than Whispering Pines. I filed enough environmental reviews and zoning objections to wallpaper my cabin in bureaucracy. They wanted legal? Fine. I could do legal. Step 1 was the County Planning Commission. I submitted a formal letter of objection to the proposed road easement. Attached the deed, photos of the property damage, camera footage, and the satellite image from Karen's presentation, where they literally showed a planned road going through land they didn't own. That part felt good, like loading the first shell into a shotgun. Step 2 was even better. See, the area where they wanted the road wasn't just an used pasture. That patch of my land had a spring-fed creek running through it, dry in the summer, but a legitimate water feature during the rainy season. I filed for a riparian buffer zone review, which sounds boring but is basically the environmental version of putting up a force field. Suddenly, the county couldn't approve anything until a soil impact study and water runoff analysis were complete. Translation: Karen's little shortcut just hit a regulatory wall. But I didn't stop there. I also talked to a local newspaper editor. Small-town guy, 30 years on the job, always looking for a David versus Goliath story to fill the community section. I handed him everything: maps, HOA letters, even quotes from Karen herself pulled from meeting transcripts. He promised to look into it. That was all I needed. Now, while all this slow-cooking sabotage was going on, the HOA wasn't staying idle either. A week later, I got a new letter. This one certified and full of legalese. It claimed that Whispering Pines had filed a petition to pursue eminent domain via a public-private infrastructure agreement. I almost laughed. First of all, HOAs don't have eminent domain power. That's reserved for actual government agencies. But second, they were trying to fake it till they made it. Bluff their way into looking official enough that the county might fold under pressure. They were betting on me not knowing the difference. Big mistake. I responded with a lawyer's letter of my own. Cost me a couple $100 to draft, but it was worth every penny. It outlined how any unauthorized attempt to develop, survey, or alter my land would result in immediate civil litigation and criminal trespass charges. I even CC'd the sheriff's office and the county commissioner, just for flavor. But the HOA? Oh, they didn't like being told no, especially not by someone who didn't follow community values. Let his grass grow wild and refused to pressure wash his porch every Saturday. So Karen escalated. A few days later, I was fixing the hinge on my shed door when I heard the sound. Beep, beep, beep. Heavy machinery backing up. I dropped the drill and walked out to the edge of my property, and there it was. A yellow mini excavator, parked just across the fence line on HOA-managed land. Two guys in safety vests were arguing over some printed plans. One of them had already climbed down into the ditch that bordered my pasture. I walked up slowly, not saying a word until they noticed me. The younger guy gave a half-smile. "Hey, sir. We're just surveying. Shouldn't take long." "Surveying what?" I asked. "Easement planning," he said. "Just the preliminary work. We were told this area was greenlit." I nodded. "And who told you that?" He hesitated. "The HOA." "Well, the HOA doesn't own this land," I said. "And unless you've got a court order or a county permit, you're trespassing." That wiped the smile off his face. The other guy climbed out of the ditch fast. I didn't threaten them, didn't raise my voice. I just stood there and let the tension fill the space between us. Then I pointed to the camera nailed to the nearest pine. "Smile," I said. "You're on tape." They left. 2 hours later, Karen showed up. No appointment. No call. Just marched up my gravel drive like she was the sheriff in an old western. She was wearing one of those straw sun hats with the ribbon around it, like she was heading to a garden party instead of a property dispute. "I'm very concerned about the tone this situation is taking," she said before I could even greet her. "You mean the part where your people keep walking onto my land like it's a shortcut to Starbucks?" Her nostrils flared. "The board has a responsibility to the community, and you're being unnecessarily combative." I laughed. Combative is filing a fake easement claim and trying to sneak in excavators without permission. Karen adjusted her hat. "We're trying to improve things for everyone, Mr. Chambers. But if you insist on being difficult, we may have no choice but to escalate." "Oh, you haven't escalated yet," I said, "because from where I'm standing, you're halfway to declaring war." She blinked. "That's absurd. No one's declaring anything." I smiled. "Good. Then we agree, stay off my land." She huffed and turned back toward her Prius, muttering something about selfishness and progress. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I'd been prepping something special. A little counteroffensive. Nothing illegal. Nothing violent. Just a statement. They wanted to act like my land was theirs. Fine. Let them try stepping onto it again. I'd make sure they remembered the smell. I wasn't looking to escalate. Truly. I'd filed the paperwork, talked to the county, even brought in a surveyor to prove, on record, that their fantasy road was trespassing on my land. But then, they made the mistake of physically crossing the line. It was a Tuesday morning when I found the gate open. Not just unlatched, wide open, swinging in the wind like it had been kicked. There were fresh tire tracks through the southern edge of my pasture, cutting straight through the clover I'd planted last fall. And the kicker? Surveyor stakes were back. But this time, they were painted, labeled with little flags. I followed them all the way down the fence line. That yellow streak Karen had shown in her slideshow? It was now physically staked out across my land like a birthday party I wasn't invited to. That was it. They wanted a road? I gave them terrain. I made some calls. Fast. My cousin Jake runs a cattle ranch about 10 miles south. If there's one thing he has more than cows, it's cow manure. The fresh, soupy, Sticks to your boots kind that clears your sinuses and haunts your dreams. Say no more, he said when I told him the story. You want it dumped or sprayed? I went with sprayed. For coverage. By the next day, Jake rolled up with his old manure spreader hitched to a beat-up John Deere. Together, we spent 3 hours coating the entire southern edge of my pasture with a thick, defiant layer of freshly flung fertilizer. 40 feet wide, half an acre long. Strategic, pungent, unmissable. We wore masks. The wind changed halfway through. I nearly cried. Worth it. But I didn't stop there. I added signage. Big ones. Painted by hand. Private property. No trespassing. Landscape treated with premium fertilizer. Another read. Future site of nature's revenge. Parking lot. Proceed at your own risk. And just for fun, I rigged up a motion-activated speaker that played a very loud, very realistic moo, followed by my recorded voice saying, "Warning, you are now entering the splash zone." My trail cams caught the reaction. The first time a couple of Karen's hired surveyors stepped past the line, they paused. One guy squinted, sniffed, and visibly gagged. He tried to take a few steps in, but his boots sank an inch into something unspeakable. He backed out fast. The other one tapped something on his phone and muttered, "Nope, not worth this." They left. No stakes. No tape. Just boot prints. Very, very unhappy boot prints. 2 days later, Karen herself showed up. She wore white sneakers. White. I watched her from the porch, sipping coffee, as she marched up to the fence line, waved her phone like it was a wand, and immediately stopped short at the edge of the manure moat. Her expression? Somewhere between outrage and dry heaving. She turned back, face twisted in pure disbelief, and snapped photos from 10 different angles. Then she tried calling me. I let it ring. She texted, "This is a health hazard. I'm reporting you." I texted back, "It's called composting. Very environmentally friendly. You're welcome." The next HOA meeting was one for the books. Apparently, Karen had tried to spin the situation as agricultural terrorism. Her words, not mine. But here's the thing. The photos of the manure wall went viral. One of the younger residents posted a slideshow on TikTok titled, "When you try to steal a farmer's land, and he has access to 4,000 pounds of cow justice." Views, 90,000 in 48 hours. The local newspaper ran the headline. The standoff at Stink Creek. HOA faces backlash over land dispute gone wrong. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain in their little power play. I was the guy standing up to HOA overreach, armed with nothing but paperwork, principal, and livestock leavings. Residents started showing up at meetings asking hard questions. Why didn't we vote on this road? Is it even legal to go through his land? Did we seriously try to sue a guy with goats and win? Karen's smile started cracking under the pressure. Her speeches got shorter. Her tone got tighter. Someone actually stood up and said, "Honestly, I'm more scared of Sam's cows than I am of your board." That got applause. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, I got a letter from the County Planning Commission. Due to pending environmental review and community opposition, the proposed easement had been formally denied. There would be no road, no project, no further discussion. The best part? They'd cited my sustainable soil use as a reason the land couldn't be considered developable in the short term. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter in the fire pit. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Let's just say, Karen was about to find out what else I'd been growing out there, besides drama. After the county's denial letter, I expected things to quiet down. I was wrong. Karen didn't go out with a whimper. She doubled down, filed an appeal with the Planning Commission, dragged her case into 3 public forums, and even tried to start a petition to hold Sam Chambers accountable for obstructing community progress. The petition got 14 signatures. 8 of them were from her own HOA board. 2 were from her cats. One was literally signed B. Ovine, which I'm about 90% sure was her attempt at spelling bovine as a joke. She handed a copy of it to the county commissioner's office in a hot pink binder labeled, "Operation Restore Access." The clerk who received it called me afterward. "She tried to claim you were weaponizing livestock waste," he said, chuckling. I told her it's called organic fertilizer. She didn't love that. I was officially unbothered. You see, while she was busy digging herself into deeper piles of procedural mud, I'd been quietly turning that edge of my pasture, the same strip she wanted to pave, into something poetic. I planted sunflowers, hundreds of them. I tilled the land by hand, laid compost, yes, including the infamous cow contribution, and planted rows that stretched the length of the former easement corridor. Within weeks, green stalks had sprouted like spears of defiance. By midsummer, they were tall, bold, and unapologetically bright. Golden faces turned toward the sun, as if saying, "This land answers to no clipboard." Then came the inspection. See, when Karen filed that appeal, the county sent a new inspector out to do a follow-up visit. Not Curtis this time. A younger guy named Adam, who wore mirrored shades and smelled like iced coffee and overwork. He pulled up, stepped out of his county vehicle, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw what I'd done. "Are those sunflowers?" I said, "planted over a protected riparian buffer, just on my side of the legal property line." He gave a low whistle. "That's one hell of a message." I shrugged. "Just trying to beautify the neighborhood." Adam grinned. "Well, it's a registered buffer zone now. This stretch is officially classified as a non-developable conservation area for the next 5 years." I couldn't help myself. "Guess that road's really hit a dead end, huh?" He actually laughed. Back at Whispering Pines, the residents had started to lose patience. Their HOA fees had gone up that quarter, again, and this time, people wanted answers. Karen tried spinning it as unavoidable legal costs associated with infrastructure advancement, but most of the neighborhood didn't want infrastructure. They wanted the pool tiles fixed and the HOA newsletters to stop misquoting city ordinances. Then came the breaking point. One of the residents, Becky, mother of 3, passive-aggressive Facebook poster turned unlikely whistleblower, leaked internal emails from the board. Turns out Karen had been fast-tracking votes, hiding correspondence from dissenting board members, and, my personal favorite, using HOA funds to pay for custom stationery that said, "Madam President." That's when the vote finally happened. At a special emergency meeting held in the Whispering Pines Community Center, the same place she'd once strutted around declaring minimal impact to adjacent landowners, the board voted 6-1 to remove Karen as HOA president. She was still holding her clipboard when it happened. And just like that, click, the Karen regime ended. I didn't go to the meeting. I didn't need to. But the next day, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't Karen. It was Jerry, one of the newer board members. Retired Air Force, steady handshake, seemed like the kind of guy who could defuse a landmine with a butter knife and a prayer. He looked awkward, almost apologetic. "Sam," he said, "on behalf of the new HOA board, I just wanted to say thank you. And also sorry for all of that." I nodded. "Appreciate it. Just keep your trucks and your roads on your side of the fence." He smiled. "Understood. We'll be staying in our lane from now on." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunflowers sway in the wind like nature's version of middle fingers. Before he left, Jerry asked, "So, what happens if someone else tries to mess with your property?" I smiled slow and wide. "They'll find out I've got plenty more fertilizer and a long memory." Karen didn't vanish. She still lives in Whispering Pines. Word is she keeps a lower profile now, sticking to her yard, watching the HOA meetings over Zoom with her mic muted. Sometimes, I see her walking near the edge of her development. She always slows down when she gets to the fence line, eyes drifting to the field where my sunflowers bloom tall and unapologetic. And right at the center of them stands a single sign. Old wood, faded paint, but still readable. No trespassing. Organic defenses deployed. She never crosses the line. Not anymore. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.